Hi, I'm Peter Reinhardt, and welcome to the Johnson & Wales International Symposium on Bread. I'm coming to you from the Hance Auditorium in Charlotte, North Carolina, where we've held the last 4 bread symposiums, and as you can see, there's nobody here but me. And this is where we usually have it. The seats are all empty because this year, thanks to you, the symposium will be presented online, virtually, in our new presentation hall, which is where I will join you in just a minute. Thank you, and thanks for being part of our new virtual Johnson & Wales International Symposium on Bread, presented by Puratos. Welcome again. Throughout the entire symposium, I'll be thanking our generous sponsors over and over again, and ask that you do as well by visiting their booths and pavilions in the exhibitor hall. There you will see lots of bonus content, and you can also make appointments to meet with the folks from these companies that serve our baking community so well. Our presenting sponsor is Puratos, who has partnered with us from the very beginning for all of our symposiums, and it is their support that helped us get this one-of-a-kind gathering of thought leaders off the ground. Please also visit our fabulous flour and milling sponsors, Ardent Mills, Lindley Mills, and Central Milling. Thank you also to our equipment sponsors, the WP Bakery Group and Allied Bakery and Food Service Equipment. And thank you also to our specialty food product companies, Probiotine, Fire Within, Big Green Egg, and Mock Mill. Please check out all of their booths to learn about their wonderful and unique products. And also thanks to our media sponsors, Cook's Country, The Local Palate, the James Beard Foundation, and the Bread Bakers Guild of America. You'll be hearing more about all of them throughout the entire series of presentations. So again, thank you to all our sponsors. At the end of today's presentation, you will also see our credit scroll, thanking all of the people behind the scenes who made this event possible, including our production and technical partner, Ganoid Communications, our creative team at Gumbo Marketing, and the many folks at Johnson & Wales University, our hosts for this, our 4th annual gathering. So stick around, if you will. But now, it's time to get things rolling with today's presentation, so let's go live. And once again, welcome to the Johnson & Wales International Symposium on Bread, presented by Puratos. And hello again, and we're live. We're back. Today is Wednesday, which means it's demo day. And we've got a special guest today, Michael Kalanty, my former colleague at when we were both at the California Culinary Academy many years ago, and have fortunately stayed in touch over these many years. Many of you know him through his online classes, his books, many books, and I'll let you read about him more in his bio. So I don't want to repeat all that, but I'm going to introduce him in a second. Before we go to Michael, I want to remind you of a couple of things. Next week, we have more presentations. Next Wednesday, we've got Roxana Julipat will be joining us, and Roxana will be doing also a demo, but producing a traditional Finnish ring loaf, but using local ingredients. And that's kind of one of our themes, is the whole idea of kind of reinventing tradition by keeping it close to home. Started with Grayson Gill and his baguette that used local ingredients but stayed true to classic traditions and things like these. These are the kinds of demos we want to do. And earlier, before we went live today, some of you saw the video from the Probiotine company, which is our sponsor for today's presentation, because they're the ones who have helped to popularize the concept and the proper use of prebiotics, which is different, as we'll learn soon, from probiotics. So I'm going to let Michael, kind of go deeper into all of that in just a second. And what else do we have? We've got next week we'll have Rob Dunn from the Dunn Laboratory on Monday, talking all about wild yeast found in unusual and strange places, and the way that they can affect flavor in breads, beers, and everything else. So, all that said, thank you. Welcome again. I'm going to turn it over to Michael later on. Those of you who have the VIP pass and want to come join us for the after party, we'll continue the conversation. But so we don't use up any more of his valuable time, let me introduce Michael Kalanty to you. And Michael, why don't you take it away?
Oh, thank you, Peter. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Michael Kalanty, and before I get started, I have to thank Peter Reinhardt, and the entire staff and support team at the Bread Symposium. I had the honor of presenting my aroma and flavor chart for bread at the inaugural symposium several years ago. So it's my pleasure to be back. So thank you for having me. I also want to thank, before we get into this, I want to thank the company Food First. They are the makers of Probioteen, which is a available prebiotic powder that can be added to baked goods or smoothies or anything like that. And also the microbiome bar, which is a little kind of energy type bar format that's packed full of prebiotics to help you with your digestive health. They made a very substantial contribution to the content of the symposium, and it's through their generous offer that I'm able to make this presentation to you today. So Bob and Brad Thornburg, thank you very much. Okay, now that said, I have a disclaimer. I'm not a doctor, all right? I'm not a physician. I am a bread baker. Now I have a certificate in nutrition through the National Restaurant Association, so I understand the basic principles of nutrition and things like that. But I'm not here to make any sort of prescriptive analysis for you, or to make any health guidance or insights or anything like that. As always, whenever it's a matter of personal health, you are the one responsible for looking for that true information, seek qualified medical advice. Again, I'm not that. I'm a baker. So what I will help you understand is what the whole microbiome is about, how consumers think of it, what they think of it, what they think of it that's correct, what they think of it that's not correct, and how you as a baker, whether professional or home baker, can use this information and bring more flavor and more nutrition to your breads. That's my job here today. So I'm going to go through that. I think I have something that says, yeah, there you go. So there's my talk overview. I'm going to talk about the consumer landscape so we can see what consumers really think is healthy food and how they look at it. Then I'm also going to do a deep dive, oh, that's not a good pun, on the microbiome. And then at the end, I'll show you how I developed a prebiotic bread that based on a sourdough and a whole grain soaker. So that's, and then there'll be questions and answers, and you can join us in the VIP room for some questions. So that's what's going to happen. I had my disclaimer. Okay, so first thing I want you to know is you've got to know who your customer is. And as I said, they have any number of campaigns, ad campaigns. They see things on the internet. They hear things in the supermarket. They have a glut of information that what they do is synthesize. And what happens is subconsciously, they use that information when making decisions. So if somewhere they heard that bread is not good, that could affect you in your retail operation. And so my job today is to make sure that you understand how they're looking at it and what you can do to position yourself to more clearly explain to your customer why bread is nutritional and how you can make it even more so. So when we talk about consumers, we have to distinguish between a fad and a trend. And I'm going to take you back about 12 years ago, and Jamie Lee Curtis and Activia Yogurt, they teamed up, and they were the first spokesperson and consumer product to team up and talk about digestive health. At the time, it was viewed as a fad. Saturday Night Live, if you remember, did several skits on what would happen if you overate this Activia yogurt, etc. But what has happened is, since then, so much more information has come out and is available through studies and research, mostly about how whole grains are beneficial for bringing more enzymes and more good bacteria to the gut, and also how they help regulate the body's system. One of the best examples of what is a trend right now is the term clean label. So clean label basically means, okay, we're not putting in there things that you cannot say, and we're not putting in anything that's been genetically modified, etc. So clean label is a purchasing driver. And in fact, it already was a trend before COVID started. Since COVID, clean label has jumped in terms of how important it is for consumers on the shelf. In fact, there are supermarket studies, two products side by side, otherwise identical. The one with the statement clean label on it is the one that outsells the other. So this is a trend in the marketplace, but it doesn't affect everybody. So you have to look, and up here on the screen, I have the different demographics so that you can look. And if your customer clientele is in, for example, the millennial group, then this is something you need to really pay attention to, because they are the most likely to read it. And plus also they have the money now to make their purchasing decision on it. And thirdly, they have little kids running around who are now called Generation Alpha, because they're the first kids in the 21st century. And so they want to pass this on to them. So for that group, it's particularly important. For a boomer group, not so important. So again, know your audience. Another example of a fad that quickly became a trend is the term plant-based. And I think now you can pretty much see plant-based on anything. And the thing you're not seeing it on, which is what I take issue with, is you're not seeing it on bread. I mean, bread literally is the original plant-based food. So like I envision a whole ad campaign in bakeries everywhere with that, because consumers are grabbing plant-based things off the shelf. It started as a fad, but about 4 or 5 years ago, Impossible Foods said, okay, you know what? Let's take an American classic like the hamburger and let's reinvent it and use nothing but plants and plant pieces in order to formulate it. Let's get the sensory attributes, the flavor, the texture, all of that stuff. And that was such a hit that now Fatburger has plant-based things. McDonald's even has come out now with the McPlant Burger, and they're testing that now in markets in Denmark and Sweden. So this is a proven purchasing driver. So bread is plant-based. So there you go. Let's go forward. The next category I want you to look at is an overriding category of what's called health and well-being. Now, this is a Nielsen ratings category, and they go in and they say, all right, these are 4 in particular areas within that broad category that consumers look at. So they're up there on the screen, and if you're good with math, you'll say, hey, wait, there's only 3, fourth one till later. But is that a product can be considered healthy and well and good for your well-being. It doesn't have to fit all of these things. For example, Permissible Indulgence is That's a great category. And a good example of that would be, okay, here are these gooey, filly, sticky buns with walnuts and raisins and 2 inches of like this goopy stuff on top. So if you want to eat healthy, I'm not sure that that's what you're going to pick. But if you're strategic as a baker, maybe you'll make smaller portions of these. And enough of this audience will say, hey, you know what? I can indulge in that because, oh, I played pickleball and I swam and I did all of that. So I can eat one of these small ones. So there are many different ways that you can be in the health and well-being category. And actually, you only really want to be in one. You don't want to try to be in them all because they kind of exclude each other. If you try to be in all categories, then mostly what you're making is water. So the 4th category is what's called functional ingredients. The importance of these is that, now this used to be where vitamins and minerals, in daily vitamins and things like that, those are functional ingredients. Nowadays, function in an ingredient can include anything from controlling my blood pressure to even elevating my mood. And the whole CBD category of foods actually is a subclass of that. So there you go. So in the process of my talk today, when I talk about prebiotics, I want you to think functional food. We're eating these for a reason. So let's understand what that reason is. And the reason is, okay, so we've learned about our gut. Jamie Lee Curtis taught us all about our gut. Now we know that it's called the microbiome. And these are just some of the influences that our gut has on us. And even in the 4 weeks since I first put this slide up here in my home, this support immunity, this is now the number one. This is the number one leader in terms of innovation in bakery items. People are like, what can I do to support my immunity while I'm eating sticky bun bites or something like that? But this is what the important thing is. I don't know why I keep wanting to go backwards. So it all comes down to what we now call a good bacteria. And you can see the specifics up there and how many thousands of these good bacteria that there are. And the goal is get these good bacteria in our gut. And there are about 30 main species. So when nutritionists say, okay, we should eat yogurt, we should eat bananas, we should eat kimchi, they are targeting these 30 specific species because they're the most abundant, they're the easiest to reach. So here's a quick look at where the microbiome is and where it is not. All right, so there's a distinction between the stomach and then the small and large intestines, which is actually the gut, the microbiome. This is where the nutrients become absorbed into the body. In the stomach, things are initially broken down and it's stomach acid, which is doing much of the work there. So when we eat these good bacteria foods, what happens is these good bacteria, which we call probiotics, get into our gut. And again, we're targeting like 30 of them more or less, but up here on the screen, I put 2 of the bigger categories, and lactobacillus is one of those, which of course, when you ferment your breads and you're developing lactic acid, you're encouraging that. And then also Saccharomyces, which of course is yeast. So the very fact that bread is plant-based and has lactic acid and yeast in it, it's already a gut-friendly food. So if you Google if you go on your search engine and look for foods for good health, these are the usual suspects that you're going to see. And what I'm curious is, all right, people know these, people are familiar with this, but they're not thinking about bread. So my challenge, well, to myself for the second half of this demo and also to you is, why isn't bread on this list? Why doesn't bread, one of the first foods of man, top that whole list of what brings good gut bacteria to us? And again, when I talk bread, I'm not talking about cellophane wrapped, air puffed specimens. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about real bread made by real bakers like you, who do long fermentation, develop lactic acid, acetic acid, butyric acid, all of these things. You'll hear why I'm saying those words later. But that's right there in your bread. So anyway, once all these good bacteria get into the microbiome, once they get into your gut, they need sustainable nutrition in order to colonize and help bring the goodness to your body. There you go. So see, not a doctor. Anyway, turns out that prebiotic fibers, this is what feeds your gut once it gets in there. And very interestingly, prebiotic fibers are found primarily in grains and seeds. So for bakers, that's kind of a slam dunk. Let's just take more grains and seeds, pack them in our already good for your gut breads, and up it from there. So I want to show you now, many people have asked me on my avatar, what are these little science molecules that are coming out of my hand here? And what they are actually is they are oleosaccharides, and there's a list of them over on the screen, and they all end with OS, so you can know that they are oleosaccharides. What's interesting about them is they are not short-term sugars, and they are not long chain carbohydrates. They are medium chain. They have about 3 or 6 little molecules in them. So they are able, when they're in the stomach, to swell up with water, pass through the stomach acids, and then be easily digested by the good gut bacteria that's already down there. That's the magic of food first. Again, this is the Probiotine, and these are the 2 products that they have. On the left, you see the Probiotine powder. They actually take a mash of grains and ferment it to maximize the prebiotic value, and then they dry it and turn it into a powder. I use some of it in some bench work, so I'll report on how that works a little bit later. And then for the on-the-go grab and eat customer, we have the microbiome bar, which comes in a variety of flavors, but this is a prebiotic power boost in a very small 40-gram serving. So easily gets packed into your to-go bag. So anyway, so here's what happens. So these prebiotics, all these OSs, there's 4 different main ones. And my illustrator, Neil Smith, who some of you may know because he did the zombie illustrations for the zombie apocalypse seminars. Anyway, what you can see is they're coming down into here, into the intestines, and the probiotics, the good bacteria that are already there, are joining with them. When that happens, it's a magic party of fermentation, more enzymes, fatty acids are developed, and also more yeast and more prebiotics. Whew, okay, that was a lot. So anyway, going back to the list of usual suspects of where you get these probiotics, where do you get these good bacteria? Well, these are all fermented foods. So in general, fermented foods have several advantages, and they're up there on the screen for you. Fermentation is going to play a very big part in how I develop my bench bread later on. So I just want to review a couple things that happen in fermentation. I know we all have different practices, our ambient temperatures, the bacteria in our local flour, all of these vary from shop to shop and from person to person. So I'm just going to give some broad understanding, how I understand it, of what fermentation is and how it acts. And then you, being the savvy bakers that you are, can take that and adjust it and adapt it to your own environment, specifically so you can get more prebiotic value in your breads and also get them to be better tasting. When you talk about fermentation to consumers, it tracks well. Many people say, oh yeah, I know fermentation. And I think it's because of the craft beer brewery explosion about a decade and a half ago that they know that. But people who are interested, who have blood sugar index or blood sugar concerns, are familiar with what's called the glycemic index number. And the glycemic index, of course, goes from 0 to 100. 100 means this is absorbed very, very quickly into the body. 0 means it's not going in. And so at the high end, we have pure glucose, which when that goes into your body, gives you the sugar spike. So what you can see is as breads are fermented, they get a lower and lower glycemic index number. And that's why it's smaller portions of sourdough are digestible, are manageable by people otherwise with some sort of digestive issues. Here's an example of how functional breads are already taking the market. This modern bakery, they're in England, and they've got a range of, well, you can see what they have: organic, whole grain, all of that type of ingredient. This is some of the labeling that they use to speak to their customers. And the one that's especially interesting to me is how it has the clock with the long, slow fermentation. So now they're actively targeting the consumers who are saying, like, okay, I want something that's better for me, and why. So this is now a visual icon in their promotions. Okay, so there you go. So that's my summary of what the prebiotics are, what the microbiome is. If you have questions, I'll do questions and answers at the end of this, and then of course in the VIP room. But now what I want to do is, now I want to go and show you as a developer, okay, here's what I did. I said, all right, you know what? I want to take this Probiotine powder and I want to assess it. I want to put it through the paces on the bench. So I've got several like coffee roasteries who have a quick bread kind of handheld breakfast item type menu. And I thought, all right, let's see if we can start people's mornings off with a prebiotic kick. So I took, you know, again, the usual suspects of what you would see in a quick bread case in a morning pastry repertoire. And I tried different percentages of the Probiotine powder. And what I came up with was about a 2%. And 2% Probiotine powder gives, you know what it really does? It really brings an umami and earthy character to it. So if you think of quick breads that are like a whole wheat scone that would have dried cranberries in it or something like that, that is the type of quick bread that would really benefit from the flavor pairing as well as the nutrition from the Probiotine. Okay, so then I said, all right, let's look at some commercial yeast breads. Let's look at things that, and then in my opinion, because I was noticing umami in these products, I said, you know what? I want to address things that have a large surface area compared to interior. So I looked at things like bagels and challah with all the braidings and things like that, because the more crust you have, the more Maillard reaction, the more potential for umami to develop in those crust flavors. And so again, I arrived at about just a little bit more % of probiotin in these products. So now I make prebiotic bagels, and kids love them. So anyway, now let's talk about, all right, how can you as a baker say, okay, let's take this prebiotic idea. How can I develop a product that's going to maximize this? The first thing you need a baker's percentage. You've got to track every iteration that you make. 1A, 2A, 2AX, 2AY. You have to track them all. And you need one baker's percent template in order to do that. There are many out there, and pick the one that you want. I like the one from the Bread Bakers Guild. I like it. I've used it. I work with them. I know several people on the guild who help bring that together, and it works for me. The thing or really it's a caveat, a baker's percent template has two perspectives. One, it gives you a broad overall perspective. And you can look at that and you can say, okay, this bread has this much water, has this much flour, it has this much salt. And you can use that in your inventory management, in your ordering pars, etc. It helps you understand the throughput of things on the floor, etc. And that's a very managerial, open look. When you're a developer, when you're working on the bench, that outlook creates a lot of unnecessary noise for you because you don't necessarily concern yourself what the overall hydration of the dough is. That comes later. What you're concerned with is what is the hydration of each one of these systems that I have. The hydration of the main dough, the hydration of the levain, the hydration of the prebiotic soaker. What are all of these? Because those have to be made workable and reliable before they're put together into a main dough. My number one rule, don't worry about the water. I think I just talked about that. So I'm just going to skip on this one and go to the next one. Okay. The next thing you want when you're doing development work is you want a benchmark. You want something that you know intrinsically, the cells in your microbiome know this bread because they've seen it in all kinds of formats in all kinds of weather and situations with more flour, too much flour, not enough starter. And so you know already how it's going to respond. For me, that is my pan au levain. It's a basic sourdough system, but it's something that for me, it's like riding a bike. So whenever I develop something, I go right to that. Here is an overview of what that pan au levain system looks like for me. I take a starter, I make a basic levain or a first build, and then that goes down into my main dough. So I have these numbers up here just as guidelines. The actual formula that I have for this prebiotic bread, that's available in the archive on the Bread Symposium website. So I have this up here just so you can see, okay, this is the strategy I'm working with. I got a starter, I got my levain, and then I got my main dough. So I've got, what do I got? I got the baker's percentage template, I got my benchmark. The last thing you need when you're developing, you need a goalpost. You need something. This is my target. Here's what I'm looking for. And I thought, well, gee, how much R&D went into these microbiome bars? So I thought, let's just take these and look on the back and let's see what they use for their prebiotic soaker. Let's see what kind of prebiotic fibers they get in there, et cetera, et cetera. And then also, I have something with flavor, aroma, and texture that I can chew. Now, it's certainly not a bread, but I can get the same sort of idea of what flavor profile I want in my bread by using this. And every time I do a new iteration of what I'm testing, I can see if I'm getting closer to this or farther away. So those are the three things that you need. Well, you know what also helps you? Fresh grinding your grains right to order. And the reason that is because most of the prebiotic fiber is in the bran and the aleurone layer of the grain. And when you grind these directly into fermentation, directly into your levain, you are maximizing how much of the flavor molecules, the enzymes, the butyric acid, all of those valuable nutrients, you are maximizing those. You're not letting them sit around and oxidize. So this is a shout out to Mock Mill. And this is, I mean, really, literally, I don't bake bread without it. So, so there's that. Now, here's what I did for a prebiotic soaker. Okay, I said, okay, we need a stick in the sand. And how will that be? So I said, you know what? I'm going to take grains and seeds, a combination at 30% of my flour in the main dough. So that's how I arrived at that number. You can see my grain and seed blend over here. And again, I just took those ingredients right off the back of the microbiome bar because they already work. So I've got my prebiotic soaker. And the one thing I don't have up there is that I ferment that at room temperature, at ambient temperature overnight. So I go about 16 hours. So now I've got my Pano Levain benchmark, and now I've got my whole grain prebiotic soaker. So now I'm putting those together. So you can see in the lower left corner how that prebiotic soaker just takes its role and comes into the main dough and plays its part there. And again, you can see that the hydration of my main dough, that 53%, I know sounds low, but that is independent of how much water the soaker's bringing in. It's just a question of how much water, 240, I'm adding to my flour, 455, because I don't want that water to be a wild card once I have fermented all of these things overnight. So when I did all my testing, of course, at the end, I want to say, oh, well, this is the best. This has the most nutritional value and all that stuff. But I'm not in a position to do that. I mean, to do those nutritional tests, there is a lot of effort. There's a lot of baking, there's tests, there's money, there's a lot of expense in order to make a claim about what is the prebiotic value of something. So I didn't do that. What I did do is follow my gut that. And for the longest time, I have followed the mantra or the mantra, I never know how to say it, that the better something tastes, the more nutritious it is. And if we can maximize the aroma and flavor molecules in a bread, that equates to esters and short chain fatty acids and all of that are in the bread itself. So I'm waiting to be proven wrong on that, but I'm not going to wait to prove that that is actually true. I'm just going to forge ahead with that because I've been doing it for about 20 years. and I haven't yet been disappointed in the results. So, you know, walking on the edge there. So what I did, I said, all right, let's do some sensory evaluation, because I don't have the technology to test nutritional information, but I can ask a selection of trained chef tasters what they think. So I went to Chef's Best, where I have a bunch of colleagues who they're all master chef tasters. They helped me develop the aroma and flavor chart for bread. Here are some of the things that we found. So first of all, okay, you're bringing a soaker in, and how does this affect the overall texture of the bread? So you can see, of course, okay, it's going to make the dough moister, so that extends its shelf life. But the other thing is, you know, the more grains I added and the more different grains I added, the smaller the crumb size got. So if you're like Instagram and you're like, oh, I love all these big open crumbs, so maybe that's not an advantage for you. But if you're looking to make canapes or a smørrebrød, and you want to take really thin gravlax and kind of pleat that over the top of something that's dense and heavy and dark, then this is the kind of texture that's going to work for you in that application. More things I found about that. The more seeds that we put in, the meatier the bread got. Now, I don't mean to say it stopped tasting like bread and started tasting like filet or something like that. No, that's not what I mean. What I mean is, if you just concentrate on how your teeth chew down on a, well, I already said a filet, so let's take a medium rare filet, and you chew through that, it doesn't have a lot of spring back. So the more seeds that I put in the bread, the less that spring back became. Also, it had lower cohesion, which is a sensory word for it doesn't gum up into a wad. And that's what makes it the perfect counterpart to a food that also behaves the same way, such as that gravlax that I was talking about before. Of course, we noticed more acidity because I pre-fermented all of these prebiotic grains. So we're developing lactic acid there. So we're going to notice more acidity. But what this acidity did was help to identify and pull out other aromas and flavors in the bread itself. Okay, let's see. Okay, so there you go. We're to video demo now. I actually have a video that I made, and I've got to thank, before we do it, I've got to thank Joe Wittenbrock and Chef Joe's Culinary Salon here in San Francisco. He opened his studio to me, and he ran the B camera, so he and I put this together over this past weekend. And then I totally owe thanks to Gurmit Singh, who took all of the video files and spliced them together to make this virtually flawless demo that you're going to see. So, Gurmit, are we queued up? Are we ready to go?
Yes, we can start.
Great. All right, so here's my mise en place for the prebiotic soaker. All right, so I've got some water at 60 degrees. I've got some flaxseed meal from Bob's Red Mill, organic barley malt. I've got some oats. I've got some hard red winter wheat. I've got my mock mill, so I can grind this directly into the fermentation. I've got my starter here, and then I've got a little bit of salt to control the fermentation, because we're going to let this go overnight at ambient temperature. All right, so I'm going to make the prebiotic soaker. I start out with my water already in the container, and I use about 10% of starter based on the total weight of all the grains and the seeds that I'm going to use. So this is where I got to take a moment to do a shout out to Puratos and Carl de Schmet, who takes care of the Sourdough Museum in St. Vith in Belgium. And my starter, Lucky Lady, has been under his care now for about 4 years. So I appreciate that, Carl. You're taking care of Lucky Lady for me while I am busy doing other things. So here she is now making prebiotic foods. So I'm going to stop for 1 second. All right. So let me see. So I've got some whole oats here. I apparently pre-measured those. And then I've got my hard red winter wheat. So I'm going to put that right on top. Let's see what the chat has to say. And let me see, what else do I need? And so also in my soaker water, I like to put a little bit of salt for a couple of reasons. First of all, to make the grains salty enough so that when they go into the dough, they're not going to rob any salt from the formula itself. And then also to control the fermentation of what's going to happen, because salt will just slow down the uncontrolled fermentation of this a little bit overnight. So now let me see, what else do I have? Oh, you know what? I also want a tiny little bit of barley malt in there. And so this is from Central Mills. So thanks, Nikki. And there you go. So I've got my ferment already in action. And then what I do is I put this directly onto the malt. And then I stir this right on in. Now I have to thank, man, I'm just thanking everybody here. Well, you know what they say, we stand on the shoulders of all the giants who have come before us. And the one I'm talking about now is Glenn Roberts from Anson Mills. And he taught me of the old Southern foodways technique or tradition of grinding fresh grain directly into fermentation so that none of the enzymes or volatile aroma molecules or anything of the grain would be lost, and it would go directly into fermentation. So it's and since I started doing that, the aroma and the flavors from my breads just has been just so noticeable. Now, I didn't show you this the last time, and I did forget to put the flax seeds meal in there. So I did do that while you weren't looking. And anyway, so what I do is I just stir that up. I put a little lid on the top of it, and I let this ferment at right at the floor temperature. I like to keep it about 60, 65 degrees. So we'll just set that aside. And now, if you look in here, this is a double batch of all of that. And this is the soaker on the next day. And what I want to do is I'm going to walk up so you can see this really, really close in the camera here and just see what we have in here. And well, you can't smell it, but what this smells like to me is it smells like butter and it smells like apple cider vinegar. And those are what I was going to say symptomatic. Those represent the short chain fatty acids that the prebiotics are able to generate as they are fermenting. And the butyric acid, of course, is, it's present in butter, but it's also that if you ever fermented like a whole grain baguette, a whole wheat baguette or something, after a while, it starts to smell like there's actually butter almost already in the baguette. And that's from the natural fermentation. And when that gets into your large intestines, into your gut, it just does so much by way of multiplying the body's ability to absorb the nutrients that are in there. And the same thing that you can smell from the apple cider vinegar. Apple cider vinegar is an acetic acid. And so anybody who's ever been encouraged to take apple cider vinegar in a tonic or a little bit in some water or something for digestive health, that's the same thing that's happening there, is that short chain fatty acid in the digestive tract helps the body pull more nutrients into, well, the body. So there you go. Then your levain goes in. Now, this is a basic levain. I make mine with, well, you know what? I put it on the formula page and you can download that from the archive. So let's get that in there. When I am doing my development, I prefer to do just about everything by hand. And the reason I do that is it really gives me a feel for what this dough is going to be like when it gets benched up and when it starts going through the machinery at hand. And then I get an idea for if it's going to be too sticky at a certain point, or, you know, all those questions of rheology and how it flows through the equipment. Okay, and now my soaker goes in, and my soaker goes in at 380 grams of this. Wow. So the grain itself is only about 30% of the weight of the flour. But once you have soaked it and it's absorbed all that, it really does. It almost triples itself in its scale. All right, the last thing that goes in is the flour, and then on top of that is the salt. So it looks stiffer than it's going to end up being. And the reason for that, again, is you've got, whenever you work with anything whole grain, there's always a question of how the water, the moisture equilibrates out through the rest of the dough. So if you look at the way I'm working this, I'm just cutting into the dough so that I'm exposing all the dry flour that just went in. And I'm just trying to blend all of the soaker and all of the other ingredients together. So you can see this is very kind of, well, it's almost like plaster-ish in a way, or clay-like. Oh, I just built an earth oven out back. So I have to shout out to Kiko Denzer, and also to Richard Miskovich, who I kept on my hotline. Like, what do I do now with this, and how does that work? So thanks a lot to those guys. Anyway, so I take this at this point, and then I'm just let this whole thing just kind of auto lease, and then I'm just going to take it from there. And the rest of the procedure is very straightforward. It gets development, and then there's a fermentation. There's a cold fermentation, and also a floor fermentation as well. So I let the dough sit on the floor for about 4 hours, and then I pack it up and let it go overnight to develop more of the acetic acid and to continue the fermentation of these prebiotics that we started earlier. All right, once the dough is proofed, peel that off. I've got a piece of plastic on this one because I'm just doing a couple of them, but generally I would keep them on the floor under like a plastic cover or something like that. So just put a little bit of rice flour on the top, and what my preference here is, I like to bake or use a bake right on a Silpat, as I use that as a transfer tool. And now, if the B camera can zoom in, I'm going to score this. So just take my razor blade, and I'm just going to do a couple little cuts here and there. And what I'm going to do on this is my copyrighted. It's not really, but it's the signature for these breads. And this is that oleosaccharide little hexagon, the one that the the superhero chef had coming in his hands. So I'm going to take that and I'm going to put that right into the Challenger bakeware. So for my development breads, I really am a fan of the Challenger bakeware. It's cast iron. It's so easy to work with, and it really simulates, for my purposes, the function of a deck oven with steam injection. So I mean, we're going to tweak a little bit when we take it into production and we bench up the formula, but for doing the test on the baking time and the temperatures and everything, this is really an excellent tool. So this is going to go back into the oven. All right, here we are. The bread's out of the oven now. This is a great time for the B camera to come in and do a zoom on this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this off the hot pan and I'm going to move it over here onto the cutting board. I'm going to let it cool here for about a half an hour, and then we'll come back and then we'll slice it. All right, let's slice into this bad boy. Oh man, this came out good. Oh, let's zoom in on this crumb shot. Oh, look at this. You can see all the different grains in here and the seeds. So it's not really one of those big open crumb kind of situations, again, because we're just developing the product in the first place. So I go for something that is more reproducible, more consistent, something that people can do in a shop. But you can smell coming out of this all the butyric acid and the acetic acid. This is really like, this is super. This is like prebiotic manna. All right, thanks for watching. Am I back?
That was great. That's a great video. I love that last shot when the frame froze. There was an awful lot of content. In fact, you've taken us right up to the top of the hour. And so what I'm going to do today is extend our first session a little bit so that the people who don't have the VIP pass can at least get a couple questions answered before we go over to the less formal after party, where many of the people who are on are also going to rejoin us. But Mike, can we just start taking a couple of the questions that have come in and throw them at you?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Do your worst.
All right. So somebody, of course, Mike Avery just asked about the glycemic index of whole grain sourdough. Basically, I think you addressed this whole notion of glycemic index, and it looks like you responded to it already. There were some questions that came on the Q&A and they've disappeared, so I'm imagining you must have written answers to them already. So I don't know if there's any of those that might have been more universal for everybody to that you may want to repeat them for the. Let me see what we have here.
Well, okay. So the one was about when I did my when I was doing my bench tests with the quick breads and the bagels and things like that. A couple people were curious whether I was at that point simulating my own prebiotic mixture or whether I was using the Probiotine powder. And in fact, I was using the Probiotine powder. It's an available product, and I wanted to get my taste buds around what this prebiotic mesh did to baked goods, so I could come to understand how it affected the crumb size, how it brought more umami, etc. So I was in fact using the powder on that. of course, you saw in the demo when I did my prebiotic soaker bread special, that was made from organic grains that I ground fresh right into ferment. So I was simulating what the Probiotine folks do.
Great. Now, I'll mention to everybody that Michael did send us the formula that he used for that prototype panel levain loaf, and that should be found if it's not already in the archive recipes folder. It will be, but it might be there even now. So we won't spend a lot of time breaking it down, except to know that you can go and get that particular formula. And of course, from what I learned from watching you is you're free to play with those percentages and create your own version following the principles that you were alluding to.
And yeah, thank you for bringing that up, because as a developer, I really strive to just have something that makes it through the system and comes out the other side. And then once we have something like that, then it can evolve when it gets into a shop, and the bakers can say, all right, no, you know what, we have this type of system and let's do that to it, etc. So it really is kind of like the very beginning of an evolution. And I encourage people to take that information and run with it, really.
And essentially, you created in that loaf essentially a prebiotic factory along the same lines of what the Probiotine people do by making that concentrated powder that you used for your first test. So the question would come is, if people have access and want to use the Probiotine in their bread directly, you mentioned 2%. Is that a good percentage? Does that replicate flavor-wise the flavor profile that you were able to get by doing it the way you did?
That's a very good question. So of course I made breads at all different percentages. I routinely start at 2 because that's kind of where your salt is. It's kind of where your yeast is. It's like a good number, and it's not. It's just a good number. So and then I would do more and I would do less, and I would see where the differences would occur. And the less you put in, the more it stayed as the original, let's say, bagel, for example. Mm-hmm. And then the more you put in it, the more the crumb got even more dense, and but oddly not quite as chewy. And but that's when you really started to get all of that umami and the butyric acid and the acetic acid, those short chain fatty acids. And that's when those flavors really came into it. So I kind of, it's always a question of who your customers are and what their flavor preferences are. So 2% for me seemed to be pretty much really the middle of a pretty solid road. So
and it's interesting that you came up with that number, because I've been making bread with the Probiotine powder for a number of years, since I first met the founders of the company, and 2% was a number that worked for me as well. I found that it gave a great flavor without drawing a lot of attention to itself. It added a lot of value to the bread. And I made bread with as high as 5%. And when we say percent, going back to baker's percentage, 5% of the total flour weight, essentially. And I've gone that high, and again, it actually, without using a sourdough starter, actually gives almost a sourdough tang to the loaf. So it almost adds. It doesn't add the quote leavening of the starter, but it adds the flavor profile of a starter.
Sure. Well, it's interesting. I recall one of the other questions that was in the chat room, and I kept saying 2%, and the question was to clarify: is that for total flour in the bread? And the answer is yes, it's the total flour in the bread, but the stipulation is that these were all direct breads. These were, water, yeast, flour, and salt in there. There were no pre-ferments. There were no sourdoughs that had more flour. There was none of that. It was only, I was like, okay, if I had a production shop and I was making these bagels and I just wanted them to be more, more nutritional, how could I just adjust that formula? And so without having too much, having to find floor space for pre-ferments or something like that. So that's why I started with a pretty much direct dose.
Fantastic. So again, those of you who want to get more information beyond this particular presentation, which is loaded, of course, you can watch it over and over again, probably 5 times, and still not get to the bottom of everything that was presented. But visit the Probioteen booth in our exhibitors hall, and you can even sign the guest book or write to them and ask them for more information and possibly talk about getting your hands on some of this product yourself. Well, I'll mention that again because I do have for our next drawing, which will be in 2 weeks. I have another knife from Henkel's. This one is an 8-inch bread knife, not quite the sword of the last one, but one that will fit in your drawer. And so that's going to the next winner of our drawing. And to be eligible, you need to sign at least 5 guest books in the sponsored pavilions, and you'll go on the wheel that will spin in a couple of weeks. So visit that booth, get more information, but also join us if you can. If you have the pass, join us in the VIP lounge for our after party, which we'll go to in just a minute. And Mike, any final comments for the group before we break away and go to the after party?
I what, the only thing I really, I have in my mind, right? You go into a store and you see the labels and it says, pan levain with this and that and everything like that. So I have in mind just like a bread and then a sign on top of it, and it says bread, the original plant-based food packed with prebiotics and good for your gut. And that's so that's what I want to leave you with. That's what we have to work with, and we really don't have to go far to fit this into the mainstream of what consumers are really looking for now. So so there you go.
Yeah, that's great. And by the way, the recipe is currently in the recipe folder, so you guys don't have to wait till tomorrow. You can download it anytime you want.
All right, let's get soaking, everybody. Let's go.
Yeah, exactly. And also, here's another question for the good of the group. If you are using the Probiotine in your bread, how would you list it as an ingredient to continue to keep it as a clean label? It is a clean product, so what's the way to list that? Do we list it as pre-fermented grain, basically blend or something like that?
Well, okay, so this is a labeling issue, and so what you have to talk to is whatever local authority is governing your labels, and generally, because it is at a small percent, it allows you to put that way at the bottom, and I don't know, I would take guidance right off the package, and see how they list it right here.
Because they list all their grains in their label, so you could say pre-fermented grain mixture, and then in parentheses list the grains.
That is exactly what they say.
That would make people very happy.
That's exactly what they say.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's a great place to kick off to our after party. So
all right.
Michael and I are going to log out of here, and most of you can just navigate over to the VIP lounge, and we will give you a couple-minute break and reconvene in about 3 to 4 minutes in the VIP lounge. Michael Kalanty, thank you so much for a great presentation.
Thank you.
Loaded with
Thanks
great
for having
information. And one, I hope that I know many people who weren't live with us today will be watching it, via the archives over the next couple of months, and we'll be referring back to it in some of the presentations still to come. And next week, we come back Monday, everybody, for when we talk about the yeast side of this, because today we talked a lot about the bacterial side, but also the yeast side is such a major player. And so it's never ending. It's fathomless. So keep on coming back. And Michael, thank you so much. We'll see you in a couple minutes in the VIP lounge.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you to our team behind the scenes. Our event, technical and production partners, Ganoid Communications, including our producer, Gurmit Singh, and his team, Jita Gajaria, Gagandeep Singh, and Jaydev Kashari. Thanks also to Ted Nelson and Lael Fretzel of our creative and marketing team at Gumbo Marketing. and the many folks at Johnson & Wales University who supported me throughout this event. My executive assistant, Sarah Standifer, communications director, Melinda Law, Chancellor Mim Rooney, Charlotte Campus President, Cheryl Richards, and our executive team leaders, deans and faculty, Maureen Dumas, Michael Schrader, Michelle Nicholas, Mark Norman, Brent Steyerwalt, Laurie Heinbach, Jerry Lanuza, Amy Felder, Harry Paymiller, Richard Miskovich, and many, many others. Thank you all.